So welcome everyone to this late July Dharma talk. July 2024. Welcome in the Zendo, welcome in the cloud. As we round the bend into this evening, I'm aware of how full the calendar at Mountain Cloud has been. We've heard Unman's teaching described as waves cresting upon waves. It seems a little like that, this rising and falling, this one body of practice, flowing, as Dogen says, of Zazen, this flowing. And we always only enter it now. Even enter is poetic, flowing, what this is. And at the same time, how still and vast. Back in June, the day after our North American Sambo Zen session, Mountain Cloud hosted a garden party. And many of you were here. Rion Roshi agreed to stay on one more night and to speak. So just before the gathering, he asked me, well, how long should I talk? What should I talk about? So I made a few suggestions. Mountain Cloud, Sanbo Zen, his own deep commitment to practice and to sharing the Dharma. Fine, he nodded. And then he stepped outside, just outside the front door, right on the threshold between the land and this main building. And the beauty struck him. He talked about interconnectedness, oneness, about what it is to breathe. Look around, he said. This is your body. Every week, I think it's on Sunday morning, I'm on the list to get a newsletter from Zen teacher Hogue Holmgren. Last week's newsletter reminded me of Roshi's talk. Here's just a bit from his message. This is Holmgren. In 3 poems, John Ashbery writes, any breathing is to be breathing into each other. Trees and plants are contained in this simple line. So this is from the poem. Any breathing is to be breathing into each other. And then the comment. Trees and plants are contained in this simple line, as are all beings and the earth itself. We can experience this gateless inhaling and exhaling as somehow closer than here. A seesaw rhythm as old as the oceans. Perhaps it's no coincidence that one of the earliest and most fundamental meditation teachings is to be aware of inhaling when inhaling and to be aware of exhaling when exhaling. This aware of gap eventually dissolves, and there is simply the breath, edgeless and fortifying. So you learn to trust the bare bones simplicity of sitting still and opening again and again to the single note of breath, body, earth, and mind. The word trust here, he writes, meaning that nothing is left out, on or off the zafu. So he offers a list. What's not left out? From the immediacy of our senses to a glacier melting halfway around the world. And then he offers a poem to help us with this trust, to help us taste the one single note. It's a poem I've read before here for us, so familiar. But you can only hear it once. This is by Li Po, called Zazen on Qingting Mountain. And Sam Hamhill is the translator. The birds have vanished down the sky. Now the last cloud drains away. We sit together, the mountain and me, until only the mountain remains. Gone. Everything vanished. And yet, one mountain sitting. Dogen called it mountain still sitting, this flowing. Bodhidharma called it vast and void, no holiness, or boundless clarity, total equality. In the weeks that were leading up to the NAS session here, back then, I started a series of talks on Bodhidharma. And I'd like to pick up that thread again. Actually, it's running through everything we're doing here. So just by way of review, inviting us in, here is Dogen's record. This is from a Dharma Hall discourse that he would have given to his own Sangha. Dogen wrote, "The first ancestor, Bodhidharma, came from the West and did not engage in various activities or give lectures on sutras or commentaries, but simply faced the wall in Zazen for 9 years in Shaolin. Sitting, Dogen writes, is exactly the true Dharma eye treasury of the wondrous mind of nirvana. Generation after generation give face-to-face transmission, intimately receiving the Buddha seal, actually transmitting the bones and marrow between teachers and disciples. Just this is the single genuine matter. Therefore, Emperor Wu of Liang asked the first ancestor, what is the highest meaning of the sacred truth? The first ancestor, Bodhidharma, said, vast emptiness. Nothing sacred. The emperor said, who is the person facing me? Then who are you? Dogen writes, the ancestor said, I don't know. He goes on, I'll leave a little out. He says, this very not knowing has not been understood for generations. He's ranting. All of you people, do you want to understand the first ancestors not knowing? In the house of Buddha ancestors, originally there is no principle of mind nature, Buddha nature, consciousness nature, simply depending on the combinations of causes and conditions of wind and fire, there are movements and activities. So he's just describing, what is this? This one emptiness, just functioning. And then he says, and yet deluded people consider movements and activities as eternal souls. This is Tanahashi's translation. What he's pointing to is something fixed. We imagine an enduring, fixed self, over time. Great Assembly, do you want to understand this point? And then after a pause, Dogen says, with the vast emptiness of nothing sacred and not knowing, you attain skin, flesh, bones, and marrow. If someone asks further about this, make them do 3 prostrations and return to their place. We're all bowing now. Skin, flesh, bones, and marrow. Those are the names that Bodhidharma gave to his 4 disciples on the occasion of choosing a successor. Now, one by one, Bodhidharma asks each disciple, what have you attained? What have you received? How do you see? How would you convey this vast emptiness, no exceptions world? And we looked at this in a couple of talks. First, Daifu steps forward and says, without attaching to words or separating from words, to allow the way to function freely. That's his way. And Bodhidharma says, you have my skin. And then Zongshi, woman, disciple, one of the 4, offers her response. It's like seeing the Pure Land once and never again. See it once. What you truly are. And that's it. Home. So complete. Empty. One. Searching for words, one radiance, one capacity. Nothing to divide. And to Zongshi, Bodhidharma says, you have my flesh. So tonight I'd like to turn this one jewel of transmission to the 3rd disciple, Dao Yu. Other than these very direct, succinct responses, we have no teaching, no record of these 3, only of Huika or Eka. I think I'll look at next time. But Dogen adds his teaching to the record. So let's listen to this scene. It's carved out now around just this 3rd disciple. Dogen says to his assembly, here is a story. The first ancestor, Bodhidharma, requested to his disciples, the time of my passing is finally coming. Why don't you each speak of what you have realized? So we hear Daifu, we hear Zongxi, and then we hear Dao Yu, who says, the four great elements are fundamentally empty. The five skandhas do not exist. There is not even one dharma to attain. There is not even one dharma to realize. There's not even one dharma to convey. And Bodhidharma says, you have my bones. Bones. We might think of bones as the structure of the body, sort of hidden but essential. An internal frame that holds everything up. The last thing to go when a person dies. But Dogen goes on after this scene. You have my bones is like speaking of the mountains, rivers, and great earth. The bones of this one body, things as they are, this desk, this sound. Not even one dharma, this empty, this one, and each thing perfectly distinct, excluding nothing. When I was sitting with this from Dogen, this emptiness, these bones, the line that comes up, and it might for some of you, this famous line, I came to realize clearly that mind is no other than mountains, rivers, the great wide earth, the sun, the moon, and the stars. Mind. There's no such thing other than exactly mountains, rivers, great wide earth. This was the line that Yamada Konroshi, Ryon Roshi's father, read after hearing it so many times, just reading on the way home from work back to Kamakura. And suddenly it went right in, right through. What happened? Dogen goes on in this little discourse. There is no shallow or deep, superior or inferior. If you can see like this, I think the like is extra. If you can see this, then you see the ancestral teacher, you see the second ancestor, and you can receive transmission of the robe and bowl. In other words, you see what you are. You receive what cannot be other. You participate in the one reality, the totality that can't possibly exclude anything. So Dao Yu conveys it. The four great elements, fundamentally empty. The five skandhas do not exist. There's not even one dharma. That's the Heart Sutra, proclaimed by the Bodhisattva of great compassion, who awakened to the cries of the world as one single cry, that one single sound. That indivisible body, awaken to the emptiness of our every construct, our very selves, awaken to no boundary, no hindrance, nothing to run into anything. The 5 skandhas, sometimes called the 5 heaps of our being, they do not exist. Form, sensation, perception, thought, consciousness, not as we imagine, not in the way we impute, not at all. So what is this? Vast and void. No holiness, no exception. Or as Dogen says, no shallow or deep, superior or inferior. Dao Yu may be the closest among these 4 disciples to the world that Bodhidharma conveys when he arrives from India to China and meets with Emperor Wu, Emperor Bu. And out of the depths of our practice, we need to hear it. That one sound. You could say nada, 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 with no opposite, or and yet, here we are. No eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind is exactly what is talking, listening, sitting, adjusting. Empty and not stuck in emptiness. There's nothing to stick to. Dogen clarifies it. You have my bones is like speaking the mountains, rivers, and great earth. Oh, I suddenly recall Ryo Naroshi here in one of his Teisho during the session. It's not like something, metaphor. No. It is mountains, rivers, trees, sky, clouds speaking. There's no other emptiness than this. So intimate, so near. That single sound, and each one unique, unrepeatable. Gone in a flash, already gone. There's a poem by Dogen that when it's given a title, it's usually translated Impermanence. Written when he had returned from China to Japan. And he was living in the mountains, getting ready, it seems, to establish a monastery, which he did. Here's his poem, it's short. To what shall I liken the world? Moonlight reflected in dewdrops, shaken from a crane's bill. To what shall I liken the world? Moonlight reflected in dewdrops, shaken from a crane's bill. This empty moonlight these dewdrops, all this fleeting form, transparent, shaken from a crane's bill, constant change. Wildly creative, a beauty we can hardly fathom, let alone allow it in, let it in. This intimate dewdrop form. Last night, as night was just beginning to settle, just at dusk, it was cloudy, and we looked up through the window, and there was this red orb of sun just slipping between the low clouds. We stepped outside to take in the view. How do you share that sky? Dogen has a line that I read somewhere long ago. It was about language. How do you share the sky? He wrote, the sky skies the sky. So immediate. You have my bones. Mountains, rivers, great earth, sky. Spending time today with these bones. I was reminded of a poem that Maura Noon sent. I think it was about a year ago now. Maura's very dear to this Sangha. She's been in dialysis for a little over 3 years now. And on August 20th, she's scheduled to get a new kidney. And we're going to be sitting. This poem she sent about bones and words. It's by Jennifer Elise Foerster. Words are not bones. We are what comes before words, what comes between them when the light changes in the forest. Oh, I just saw that crane's bill. Dewdrop shaken from a crane's bill. Words are not bones. We are what comes before words, what comes between them when the light changes in the forest. Actually, it's so poetic. There's no between. Always changing. But this is the bit I'd like to share. After poem, Maura wrote her own version. It's in list form. Like dewdrops falling. Words, bones, before, after, between, light, change, forest, one. There is nothing of substance. And yet, such beauty. Thank you for this shared practice.